It's time for another episode of the Cultural Hall. And settling into this, I'm excited to visit with Christian Kimball. Gonna get to know all about him, obviously, and then talk about living on the inside of the edge. I was first made aware of this book by a guy who helps out with the Cultural Hall. His name is Matthew Jalalian, and he said he went to one of Christian's book events, as this book is just brand new out, and he said, "Hey, listen, this would make an amazing interview for the Cultural Hall." So I said to Christian, "Hey, come drop me off a book at my house, and if you do that, we'll have a chat." He brought a book. He even signed the book, and now the chat begins. Thanks for being here, Chris.
Thank you. It's good to meet you. It's good to meet you in person. I don't always get to do that.
I very actually rarely meet the people that I interview in person, and so the fact that we got to do that before we got to do this conversation, an honor to me. Before we get into what living on the inside of the edge is, I think that's kind of a curious topic for a lot of people within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I would love to get to know you a little bit. As we were talking right before we turned on the mics to record, we talked a little bit about some cancer in the past. Maybe we start there, as that's sort of top of mind.
Well, that's fine. As I mentioned there, I tried in the introduction to the book to lay out a few reasons about who I am, and that's one of them. So it's not. I mean, I've kind of exposed myself quite a bit in this book. Yeah, back in 2007, I was diagnosed with a rare cancer that invades the abdomen, and I ended up with major surgery and chemotherapy and pretty major stuff that changed my life. In effect, like those kinds of things do. I
Hmm.
mean, I actually expected that I would not survive the operating table.
Really?
That was that was unreasonable given the statistics, but it was what was in my head.
Mm.
So I went through. I'm done. Let's check in with what I've accomplished in life, and um, that was a that was thought provoking. Put it that way.
So
I
give
mean,
me
I'm
an
delighted to be alive, but I'm like a second life, and because you go through those kinds of thoughts.
give me an idea of some things that have changed since that time, because I've heard that reflected from other people that like it is like a second lease on life when you're facing down what you whether it's founded or not, you're facing down this idea of death, and then you're like, oh nope, I got a gimme, I get a mulligan, let's do this again. Like, what have you done differently, or how do you look at things differently than before?
Well, it may be different if you were 30 when you went through this kind of thing, but I was in my mid 50s and I
Hmm.
was thinking. So I checked in with my job and career, with my children who are adults and have their own children, with sort of where is life, and went through a process of thinking I don't want to be gone. I don't want this, but I in effect I've had a life. I mean, I can check off this is not terrible. And so you wake up after the all the operations, and then you're in the process of recovery, which is awful. But um, I got to a very serious kind of deep, one day at a time kind of reflective life that this is all bonus time. I mean, sure, I mean, I sit down and write a book, and that takes
Hmm.
years. I do other things, I plan ahead, it's all bonus. It's all extra. And so the idea that I'm uh, trying to get somewhere, trying to accomplish something, it takes a whole different aspect. And I really, um, some days are crummy, but most days are just, I got a bonus day. This is one more bonus day, and let's enjoy and take this one day at a time. That's probably the biggest single feeling
Hmm.
about it. I mean, you also end up with um, we're going on and on.
Oh no,
I'll
you're fine.
finish the
i'm
sentence.
i'm i'm
There's a
taking the adventure with you. Let's do it.
yeah, there's a kind of new world that's happening in medicine, in effect, in the 21st century. There's a whole cadre of cancer survivors. I mean, in the 20th century, if I had been diagnosed with what I had in the 20th century, I would be dead. I mean, everybody in this category lasted, 5 years or less.
Wow.
Uh, but now I'm 15 years beyond, and there are, as we were talking, there are serious consequences of the kind of treatment that keeps you, that keeps you alive. And so it's new normal. It's different, and I'm, and that's great. But in fact, medicine doesn't know very much about that. It's a new field of study. What I got from the doctors was we pretty much know what the next year will be like as you recover.
Uh-huh.
But beyond that first year after chemo, after surgery, we don't know. I mean, you're going to be all you cancer survivors will be kind of one of a kind experiments on what life after is like.
Yeah, they kind of wish you, they say, good luck and let us know how it is. We would love to study and to find out. Let me ask you, did any elements of your faith change?
Interesting. Uh, yes, in the sense that, and I'll hesitate to say this, but you ask. I really crystallized that I don't believe in an afterlife, that I don't have that confidence or belief. And so my faith, my sense of what God is about, what religion is about, boy, really came down to making Zion on earth, making this earth, this life, this people and society a you know a garden, a Zion, a place. And with because I realized I don't really have a belief in an afterlife, I don't pay attention to that. It isn't, all the things that are, this will work out in heaven, or do this now so you get a reward later. That kind of washed away, and all my focus has become making this life good.
Yeah.
I mean, not this life like my life, you know, like the old wine women and song Dionysus, but life for people, for us, for society, a good in this life.
Give people a little bit of context as to what your interaction with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is. If you are a member, a convert, all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. People love to know that because they like to know, okay, well, where's this guy coming from? Where do I align with this guy? What is this guy?
That's actually that's really important for this book because I'm an all-in multi-generation. Grandfather was president of the church, Spencer W. Kimball.
I wondered if there was the connection. I never like to assume the heritage,
Yes,
but that was your grandfather?
that was my grandfather. I mean, they had 4 children. I'm the oldest son of the youngest son
Okay.
of Spencer W. Kimball. There are lots of cousins, and so it's not a unique category. It's a one of 30 category, but I'm one of those, or 30 or 40, I forget the number. Um, and we are, by the way, my cousins and I are very different among ourselves. It's not like there's a stamp like that's a Spencer Kimball grandson and
Sure.
he's all this. Um, that should be clear because some of my cousins may be appalled by what I'm doing here and some are celebrating. But all in, multi-generation on both sides. Grew up I grew up in Wisconsin, which might be relevant, and not in the Intermountain West,
Yeah,
and
it's
not
a
in.
different experience with your engagement with the church for sure. Those that grow up along the Jello Belt and those who aren't.
Yes, I think that is different. Although, um, because my father was in bishopric or a stake presidency my whole life, because my grandfather was an apostle from before I was born. You're in that. I grew up out in what we call the mission field
Right.
in Wisconsin, but connected in important ways. So, and I, checked every box. Went on a mission, married in the temple,
Where'd you
all
serve?
the callings, sort of fast track leadership, elders quorum president, et cetera, up to being a bishop in the mid 1990s, and then the story changes. So that's where we're going, I guess.
Yeah.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So a couple questions. Just a real quick aside. Where did you serve your mission?
In South Korea.
Okay.
It was South Korea. It was the Korean mission when I went. It was split while I was there. So for the Korean missionaries who keep coming back and keep connecting with me, I was in the Busan mission, the south half after in my second year.
And then another question that I have sort of around the last name of things, because I wonder, is Kimball within the church, do you feel like recognizable enough that when you say Christian Kimball, that people go, and kind of have the question around the last name? Like I've known a few McConkeys, Hinckley, I think is maybe a little bit more, but is Kimball, do you think in line with some of those other names where people automatically assume the relation to Spencer W?
Interesting. I don't know. Um, I think many do, and I get those kinds of questions. On the other hand, Heber C. Kimball had so many wives and so many children and so many sons. No, when I go into town, it's to Heber City, Utah,
Mm-hmm.
and I in the shops in the in the grocery store when I use my name, I don't think anybody makes the connection that Heber comes from Heber C. Kimball. I just think uh, there's so yes and no. I mean, from my family side of things, my great grandfather was sent to Arizona to help colonize, to build up Arizona,
Mm-hmm.
and so the we are outsiders to the Utah, Salt Lake City, Mormon world. I mean, we were sent away into what was almost thought of as exile,
Yeah,
and
it still is, to be fair.
only come back into the. I mean, Spencer Kimball was the uh, for many years. All of the church leaders were right in the Salt Lake Valley, and Spencer Kimball was one of the. I think he was the first in the 20th century to be called out of elsewhere,
Mm-hmm.
called up from Arizona.
So, one other question that I guess I would like to ask around that, just because I'm curious. Do you have a particular memory when you think about your grandpa that calls to your mind when you think, oh yeah, that was my grandpa? That as a grandpa, maybe not so much as the prophet of the church.
Um, I have several, I guess. One, but I'll tell you too. One is just sitting with. I mean, one is feeling resentful that the church took him away. I mean that his life was called into church service all the way until he died,
Mm-hmm.
and I resented that actually. Um, I mean, I didn't think about it till later that it was a burden. Um, but I remember sitting at his table on a Sunday night when he would have bread and milk. But uh, we got bread and milk plain, and he got bread and milk with strawberry jam in it. Uh,
Well, the
uh,
strawberry jam is for the adults, Christian. You don't.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. All the sweets, whether it's honey or jam. I also remember, and this is maybe a church related context, but I happened to be in his home in 1974, around the time of General Conference, spring 74, which would be the first conference when he was the president of the church.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't remember why I was there, but I happened to be there. It's just staying in the bedroom room where the cousins did, and he came out of his study late in the evening after. This was a few days before conference, and he said, "This is hard. This is I'm working on what I'm going to say, And I've given talks I've been in general conference for decades,
Mhm.
but this is the first time they will actually listen to me.
Wow. Wow. And then was that so I guess just following up on that, was there things, obviously that's the first talk that he gave that conference. Were there notable things that were distinctly different from that talk to previous talks or
I've never compared. I mean, there are a
Huh.
few talks that I note or that I go back to, but I didn't ever make that comparison or so I don't know the answer. Yeah,
Um,
I'm sure there are people who study the talks and would. I know
yeah,
he
they
thought about it differently. That's all.
yeah, they would quickly be able to tell you, yes, his use of the words this and in this many times in this conference he used to say this and now he says it because that's what some people do as they study those things. As we look towards talking about some of the points about living on the inside of the edge, I just want to cue up this conversation. Then we'll take a quick break and come back in the second block. But the question is what edge? What are we talking about?
Um, I, I do want to be a little loose about that because I think that people spend way too much time defining others,
Hmm.
and I, I think it's ultimately is a self-definition.
Okay.
That is, but the sense of edge is um, progressive, heterodox, questioning, doubting. It is the idea or the feeling that maybe I want to leave, or maybe I am not all in, or maybe I'm uh, pushing the edge, that I'm feel sometimes at church like an outsider, or that I'm stifling myself because if I spoke up what I really think, I would be shunned or I would be excluded. Any of those kinds of feelings, any of those kinds of thoughts, I usually, for myself, I usually capsulize it um, as the feeling that there are times when the church is an antagonist instead of just a comfortable home that I'm happy with. And that's for me the
Hmm.
sense, but I think people come at it a lot of different ways. But that feeling that you're on the outside or you're headed to the outside or uh, at an extreme that you're one step out and
And we'll
all of
get into
those.
it. And we'll get into it because it is a survival guide, as the front of the book notes. So we're gonna get some survival guide kind of tips, some different ways of being able to engage. Christian has prepared these to kind of talk around, and I'm excited to be able to get into this. I should say very clearly that the opinions that are going to be expressed are Christians. That way you feel like you don't have to kind of mince words or walk lines or anything like that. As we get into that, we know that it's kind of your engagement and your experience. So feel free to kind of free flow as far as that goes. Let's take a quick break. When we come back in the second block, we'll get right into it.
I'm still alive. Yeah.
Oh, here in the second block of the Cultural Hall, I encourage you to become a Patreon saint. Why don't you? You've thought about it. You've been a fence sitter. Now become a Patreon saint. Go to patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. We call it putting your money where your ears are at. Can you think of a greater service that your money could do than to go to the Cultural Hall to continue to produce episodes like this? It's simple. It's easy. Patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. You get to be a part of the secret but not sacred Facebook group where all the Patreon saints are hanging out. We would love to have you there. You can do a year-long pledge or just go month to month. Please, it helps us out. I'm not going to beg, but you should hear a little bit of begging. Patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. So, Christian, you sent this over to me, and I really like this. It's simple, it's direct, it's sort of 4 points about living on the inside of the edge. And I hope that we can take the the time to really get into them, what you mean by them, kind of the background around them, and then maybe how we can facilitate these different points in our worship or in our engagement with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The first one is grow up. And I like that. It's right. It's direct. Tell me what you mean by grow up.
There's a background to the phrase "grow up," which almost can offend people, and I think it took 1,000 words or more to try to explain that so it wasn't offensive.
Mm-hmm.
That the background is that very often in conversations about the church, about being on the edge, about difficulties with the church, uh, we get a lot of criticism. If the church would only, if they're doing this to me, if the people at church would just stop, there are all kinds of and for this book, I really took the position that whatever that is that you would like to change, it's not going to change. It's not going to change in my lifetime. It's not going to change fast enough to make a difference. And so if you are a person, I am such a person on the edge of the church, however you define that for yourself, but you want to be looking in, you want to be hanging on the inside and participating in some way. One of the things you don't get is that the church changes to your liking, that that the people or the culture fixes itself, and so since I start with the idea that that's not going to change, that's not going to fix, we have to grow up. You have to start with yourself and basically take maybe fix yourself. Maybe that's a little bit strong, but take an adult to really that's the end of the grow up, is approach the church on an adult to adult level. I mean, if you're going to have a conversation with your bishop, do that as an adult, not as a child talking. The model that I grew up with, and that I tried to get out of when I was a bishop unsuccessfully, is that when you go talk to the bishop, you're a kid talking to your dad, asking for advice, asking for counsel, asking to be told what you did wrong or what you did right. And that's, in my opinion, that's not survivable. I mean, if you get to a not completely happy relationship with the church, and then you go talk to your father figure who's going to tell you what's wrong, that feels so bad that people leave. I mean, people walk away, or they just crunch themselves back into this child model and say, okay, just tell me what to do and I just won't think about it anymore. And I think neither of those is a good place to live. So the approach is, since they're not going to change, I have to take the step forward, which is to become an adult, and that's the grow up.
How do you recommend we do that? I mean, you're right in that if you're just like, grow up, come on. I mean, that sounds a little bit harsh, but for those that are hearing this and go, okay, yeah, I mean, what he's saying makes sense. I certainly feel kind of, the way that he's expressing, maybe a little infantile as I go to speak with my bishop or whatever that thing would be. Is it the words? Is it the way that we view the church? Is it the way that we view that relationship with like a bishop or stake president? What do you think are maybe the first steps, or just a step that we can do towards that? You mentioned as a bishop that you tried to change that and sort of failed. Not because of you or anything that you did or didn't do, but it didn't work that way. So what can we as individuals do to take steps towards that?
At one level, at one sense, it's the same kind of work that is growing up in a family. I mean, I use, there's several models you could use, but I use the model of growing up in a family where the goal ultimately is to be an adult in the family, to grow up, but to still be connected, to still have conversations with your siblings, with your parents, but as an adult. I mean, they're models of psychological, personal development that have to do um, with dealing with both feelings and logic, that have to do with integrating your sense of self so that what you understand about yourself is reasonably aligned with reality.
Mhm.
Um, and those are all uh, in line with, they're the same kinds of things that you do as a teenager growing up. But I actually think, with respect to the church, with respect to your relationship with your bishop or with the church, the first and the biggest point is to even realize that it's possible, that it's something to think about. That the church, I mean, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does this, but every church I know about does this. It promotes a a parent-child relationship. It poses the church as parent and the members as child, and that's the way the conversations work. And I believe, if you think, and I experience, if you think about most of the talks you hear at church, they're pitched kind of to a um, middle school level, and part of
Mm.
that's about translation. Part of that's just the way churches work. I mean, they're pitched at that level, and just recognizing that's what's happening, just recognizing it, just opening up in your mind the possibility even that you could be an adult, that you could, instead of taking orders, that you could listen and say, oh, that's interesting, well, maybe I agree here and maybe I don't agree there, and let's think about it further, or let's have a further conversation. I mean, if you sit in general conference and you hear every word as a command, and
Mhm.
you're just taking it in as a command, I mean, you're being a child in that relationship. If you
Sure.
sit in general conference and you hear it as, well, that's interesting, and that's his point of view, and I'll think about it. I mean, I'll think about it means you're paying attention,
Yeah.
but you're paying attention like an adult, taking it in, considering, thinking about it. But we don't even get told that's possible at church. And
Mm.
so my first point is, yeah, that's possible. I mean, just to say, you know, break open this way of living, and as I when I'm talking about that, I like I do end the list on, maybe I'll take a nap, which is supposed to be which is supposed to be a little chuckle. It's
Uh-huh.
supposed to, be a little light touch in the book, but it also is meant to say, and sometimes I don't even have to pay attention. Sometimes I can just, I don't have to figure everything out right now. That's
Sure.
also an adult attitude. I mean, I can, I'll do that next year.
Sure. Let me ask you this. Do you feel like the church is shifting at all towards this? When I think of like the For the Strength of Youth, the latest pamphlet, the revision of the pamphlet, there certainly seems to be a little bit more of like, what do you think and how do you feel and what will this shift and transition for you, as opposed to 2 feet on the floor and don't make out this way and don't date till you're 16. I mean, it certainly seems like, I mean, maybe glacially slow, but it does seem maybe like we're moving in this area.
Oh yes, and I think there's probably more than I know about going on,
Mhm.
but I think that's I think the concept is there, and it's, lots of questions about how quickly it gets into the wards and
Mhm.
stakes and local. I mean, I've heard, for example, use the For the Strength of the Youth, the new version. I've heard wonderful stories about stake level and ward level discussions that are, hey, this really means think about it, and this really means we have some judgment and some consideration of alternatives in mind. But I've also heard other discussions that mean that, about other discussions in other wards, where the the answer is, okay, you're, yes, this is talking about judgment, this is talking about decision making, this is talking about thinking about alternatives, but the right answer, after you do all of that, is what's in the old one.
Mhm.
Uh, that's and so we
Funny,
already
isn't
know
it?
where that thinking is supposed to end up.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to push back a little bit on with what you said is that, the sort of acceptance that things aren't going to change. Now, I find it maybe ironic isn't the exact word, but I mean, as the grandchild of Spencer W. Kimball, maybe one of the largest changes within the church, some would argue at least a little bit that it was agitators within the church saying, come on, blacks in the priesthood, let's do this. But not only that point, you also talk about in the early teens of the 21st century with like Kate Kelly and the women being able to have more rights within the church because of her push towards ordained women, or even as recent as just a couple years ago with Sam Young and the being able to have parents or other individuals in with bishops interviews and kind of protecting our children. People would point to those and say, man, if those people would have given up, maybe those changes would have never occurred.
Oh, I clearly change happens, and you're right that I would be the last to suggest that it doesn't. And uh, and the pushing for change is one of the what I consider one of the real legitimate reasons to stay in, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
to participate. And I think it's a common belief. I mean, I don't know that it's true or not, but it's common belief that working for change from within is more effective than being a completely outsider lobbying. Even though people who campaign for change from within sometimes get kicked out,
Sure.
as uh,
As I
several of your
indicated.
examples would
Yeah.
would would illustrate. However, um, and so yes, there's change, and yes, it's a perfectly valid and legitimate reason to be participating and even agitating. Although I know we get church leaders saying don't agitate, and that's a bad way to participate.
Sure.
For my audience, yeah, shrug that off. But but I'm for this but I'm talking about the individual. But I'm
Okay.
talking about the individual case living, trying to live within, and there I believe, but this is more my attitude, and so I don't try to preach this to everybody, but I actually do think that if you put on the obligation, if you put on, if this would only change, then it would be okay, or then I would be satisfied, you're going to be frustrated.
Yeah.
You're going to be, and so for my own self survival, if you will, I put on the mantle, I put on the overlay that yes, I'll talk about what I'd like to see. I'll talk about how we could do things better, but I don't expect it. I mean, I
Okay.
don't expect this to happen in my lifetime. I mean, my first experience actually was with a man whom I love. I mean, he's gone now, but I served with him as he was a bishop. I served with him as a counselor. Um, he sat in the back row for I think 20 years, um, refusing to participate in a full sense because uh, blacks were not black men were not introduced to the priesthood. Black women were not allowed into the temple. I mean,
Mhm.
because of that, he refused to participate in a full sense and sat on the back row. I mean, eventually that changed, but that was years and years of kind of um, passive resistance, if you will.
Yeah.
And and so I look at him. I mean, I served with him years later after '78, but I know his history, and I know that that was like 2 decades of passive
Sure.
resistance, and that's a kind of time frame that you have to think about when you're interested in change in the church. That's
Well,
uh,
and it's certainly with the onboarding of this conversation, I think the perspective is as far as this goes, where you were facing down death. I think that this molds into part of this conversation. and the way that maybe this has been formed and the way that you look at it. I love the second point that you make, and this sort of just piggybacks on what we were just talking about, which is break the binaries. What does that mean?
Um, it's a quick phrase, of course, but the idea of binaries, I think, is a killer. That is, people will say you're in or you're out. They will talk about the church as true or false. I mean, in
Hmm.
fact, we have presidents of the church making sentences like that. And while I could have a whole philosophical discussion about binaries and whether that's true or whether that's a good way, I'm very pragmatic here. I think that for a person with questions, with doubts, with edge-like considerations in their life, who's also interested in engaging with the church and being not completely gone or completely out, um, the binaries of in or out, or true or false, force people into decisions that they don't like. I mean, you get all in or you're gone. That's a binary. And what I find in people's real life and what I talk about in the book is options, middle grounds.
Hmm.
I mean, that does end up with some criticism. I mean, you hear lukewarm and
Hmm.
spew out of the mouth, and
Yes.
it's such an easy one-liner, but that really is for people talking about survival, talking about a long-term life on the inside of the edge. That looks like lots of middle grounds, like people talking about the church is a good place to be, which is not a true statement. It's not a false statement. It's not, I mean, good. It is useful. It is valuable for me right now. Um, those are, I just threw out three phrases that are not
Hmm.
true or false. And those are examples of breaking the binaries. And every time you come to a binary for people who survive, I think we find middle grounds, we find middle ways, we find um, other ways to talk about or to think about what we're trying to do.
Do you think that the push towards binaries are more intrinsic or extrinsic? Is it the culture telling us that we need to be in, out, good, bad, this, or is it within us because we've grown up in the culture that we go, I have to make a decision. I either, need to determine what I am, or is it a little bit of both?
I think it's both. I think on the one hand, it's rhetorically easy. I mean, if you're going to write a talk, if you're going to give a sermon, in or out is the easy way to do it, and any kind of nuance is more difficult. And any kind of nuance is any kind of middle way, any kind of alternatives are talking to adults, right? They're if you're going to when you talk to teenagers, it's very common to push uh, one way. This
Hmm.
is what you should do.
Hmm.
And so rhetorically, I think we by the very fact that we're talking most of the time at a teenage level, we bring ourselves into we use the rhetoric of binaries, in or out, march forward. But I think it's also um, I think we do it to ourselves. That is, people want, this will take us to point number three, right? But
Hmm.
people want certainty. People want, I think it's just a human nature to want
Sure.
the sure thing, want the certainty, want the black and white. I mean, it's you could say it's lazy thinking, but I think it's a natural desire that I want the answer. I want and um, nuance, middle ways, alternatives are more work. They're and I mean that is the way adults operate in the world, is
Sure.
second best solutions, mixed motives, complicated messages. That's real life, but that's much more work just tell me which way to march and I'll keep
Yeah, I'll
going.
march it. You just tell me. Listen, I'm on. Is it? Oh, is this way? I'll go that way. Perfect. Just tell me. Let's take a quick break. When we come back in the third block, we'll get to those points 3 and 4 to tease up point number 3. It's quit the magical thinking. So we'll come back and we'll start there in the third block of the Cultural Hall. Here in the third block of the Cultural Hall, take a moment and leave us a review, especially if you are an Apple podcast listener. We love being able to read those reviews. We share those, positive or negative, on the show when we receive them. We would love for you to do it. I would also say that if you have something negative to say, just keep it to yourself. I don't need that. I don't need that hate. I don't need that. You can keep it to yourself or tell people in your ward that you hate this show. You don't need to tell me. But if you do tell me, I will share it with other people and try and find out who you are and likely bully you in a social space. So just nice comments. Let's just keep the nice comments coming. I may have been partially joking as far as the bullying goes. Christian, let me ask you as we get to number 3, quit the magical thinking. I love the idea of magical thinking. It conjures up in my mind several ideas as to what that means. But what say you? What is magical thinking?
I'm interested in what it conjures up for you, because it's been an interesting title and one liner. I find that it's that people come to that chapter heading and that concept almost with an instinctive, I don't agree with him to begin with. He's gonna go down a rabbit hole that I don't like. And then but then I find that after they get it, after they've read the whole chapter, after it sort of clicks in their mind, it's a really useful memory jog. People come back and say, yeah, that I get it. Magical thinking. Um, the reason it's kind of deceptive is that people come to it thinking, oh, we're going to talk about prayer and miracles and spiritual feelings, and he's going to say, that's all bunk and that's not real life, and he's going to diss on a spiritual life, and that's not what I mean, but that's kind of gets people agitated as they come into this
Sure.
thought.
They just hear it and they sort of bristle and go, "Oh, hang on. Okay, go
Okay,
forward. Let's do
but
this."
then what I spend I spend quite a lot of time trying to explain, and I do this in 3 or 4 different metaphors and 3 or 4 different examples, that what we're talking about is certainty. The magic is the sure thing. The magic is that every time the magician reaches into the hat, the rabbit comes out.
Mhm.
It's still a surprise. It's still kind of exciting, but it happens every time. And if the magician is good, so the magical thinking is it's going to happen every time. It's to put it back in church or religious terms, it is an answer to prayer that you get. I mean, it's like if I do X, Y, and Z according to know, this section of the Doctrine and Covenants, I will do X, Y, and Z, and then I'll get an answer.
Mhm.
So the most my kind of powerful experience with this problem or this topic was with a couple coming to me when I was a bishop, saying, we're thinking about getting married, and he prayed about it, and his answer was, yes, we should get married. And I prayed about it, and my answer was, no, we should not get married.
Mm.
How can this happen? I mean, this is breaking our the whole model of how prayer works, how answers to prayer, how spiritual things work. That conflict, and it I mean, that's real life. And I've had other bishops
Yes.
tell me, yeah, this happens. I've spent hours and hours counseling people in this kind of situation. And I mean, that's real life, but it breaks the model that people have about how prayer works, how spiritual things work, how miracles work when that conflict happens. But that's real. And so the break the magical thinking, stop the magical thinking is um, stop expecting the sure thing. I mean, that sure thing is when, and really to extend to the end of the thought is, first of all, that sure thing isn't there anyway. I
Sure.
mean, but now we're talking theology.
Right.
But the pragmatic point is, if you believe in the sure thing, if you if you build your life around the sure thing over and over, those of us who have been through it for a few more years than you have,
Hmm.
find that it breaks, that
Sure.
the sure thing doesn't happen. And if you've built your life around that, it's devastating when it breaks. And a lot of people end up quitting on religion, quitting on God, quitting on the church, whatever the church is,
Hmm.
when that break happens, when they were counting on the sure thing and something happened. I mean, they
Yeah.
gave a blessing and the man died.
Mhm.
That was that. Um, it's so devastating to count on the sure thing and not get it, that I I I want to spend a lot of time telling people, don't go there. Try to get, or if you've gone there, which is really, that's actually the hard point, is we got that in primary. We got that in junior Sunday school. We
Mhm.
got fed that sure thing because it's an easy way to talk, and because we want it and we think that way, we got fed it. So we, almost all of us, have it somewhere in our minds.
Sure.
And so we may not be able actually to get rid of it. We may only be able to be aware that it's there.
Well, and to speak to that, I mean, a moment of vulnerability. So in my first marriage, I can distinctly remember praying about it and feeling these spiritual gifts and confirmation that, you know, that was the person that I was supposed to marry. That, I felt that. I was like, this is, as any indication of other times that I have felt the Holy Ghost confirming the choice of the thing that I'm supposed to do, that is this moment. And I got married, and it was horrible. It was the worst experience ever. Ended in divorce, was not a great experience, went on for way too long, allowed myself to be in situations that I should not have been in, as far as like being treated as an individual. Came out on the other side and went, hey, God, where were you on this one? What were we doing here? Why? I felt the things. And then, it causes you to do two things. One, which I admittedly initially was, where it's like, yeah, okay, pal, we're going to take a break. Me and you, we obviously, we aren't communicating the way we wanted, or the way that I wanted or expected that it should be. So there was sort of that break for a minute. And then two, it causes you to go, okay, well, let's say, let me give God some leeway. There was a reason for this. And then I started to, try and search for all the reasons that maybe, okay, maybe the end of the line wasn't that the marriage was going to be an eternal marriage and last for forever. Maybe there were things that I needed to learn within it. And if you can't find those mileposts of why that was supposed to occur, it also becomes frustrating. And being able to go, okay, so what's the point? And I can see why people, given my experience or others, would just be like, nah, forget it. It's not there. It's not real. It's not, or I lied, or I missed it, or there's some sort of disconnection for me. I'm out.
Yeah. And I, and then I would circle back. And if I were getting to counsel you in that situation,
Uh-huh.
I would say, um, look, that spiritual feeling, that confirmation from the Holy Ghost, that's one piece of information. That's not, if you don't take it as a sure thing, don't take it as this is now determining my life. Take it as an important piece of information. But you've also got 16 other pieces of information. And
Mm-hmm.
you, as an adult thinker, using logic, using everything you've ever learned, I take all of that into account. You still might make a mistake. You still
Sure.
might end in a marriage that doesn't make sense. But if you take that spiritual confirmation as the be all and end all, as the summum bonum, as making all your decisions for you, you end up in these kinds of situations where it doesn't work, and now your whole faith is destroyed. Now your relationship with God, your whole feeling, is gone. If you treat it um, as important information, that now, that to me, that's an adult way to deal with life and to deal with God. And that's so I'll take it all the way back to grow up, right? I mean,
Mhm, mhm.
all of these things can be connected together. You know, the binary thinking is it's either the right thing or the wrong thing to do. I mean, instead of maybe this is a good thing, or maybe this is a good experience for the next few years, or maybe it's not. But the magical thinking is there's one answer. There's a sure thing. If you break that up and you say this is information for me to work with, that's now I'm a thinking human being. I'm participating in the process instead of taking orders.
I
I'm even dealing with God as an adult rather than as a child.
I'm going to speak something into this that I think is probably pretty inflammatory, but I would like to speak it into it. I think that this is where the gift, air quotes for those that can't see the video, of the perspective of cancer for you allows you to be able to see this from a different perspective. You didn't do anything that earned you cancer. There wasn't any sort of, life decision that you did or didn't do. It wasn't a thing. It just was. And I think that things like that, they're horrible. I want to be very clear that I'm not saying, oh man, you're so lucky you got the gift of this particular thing. But it is a perspective change that I don't think that maybe some of these other things where we get to choose force that perspective.
That's fair, and I don't take any kind of. I think that's good perspective, but I would broaden it. I mean, I go down the line of theodicy and you try to figure out what's God have in mind for me. What is, does everything have a purpose and does everything have a line? And one of the places that breaks for a lot of people, that the idea that everything has a purpose, that everything has a reason, it's all for the benefit in the long run,
Mhm.
where one of the answers to that is it's how you deal with it as opposed to what happened to you. But
Sure.
and now we're down into a different conversation. But I think that one of the places it breaks up is cancer, it's earthquakes. I mean, I'm
Mhm.
thinking of Turkey right now.
Sure.
It is natural disaster where you could still, some people will still rationalize all that as God is doing that for my own ultimate benefit. But for a lot of us, those kinds of things do break the model of it's all for a purpose, and we move to the the world's a complicated, difficult, messy place, and it's more of a chaos than it is ordered and principled. And I think, in effect, you could describe my whole attitude and all of what I'm portraying in this book as um, an adult dealing with decision making and responses to chaos and uncertainty. I mean, in Paul's words, we live through, through the glass darkly.
Mhm.
We don't have the answers. We don't have the certainty. Life is messy and complicated, and that's real. And a religious message that says, "I have the answer. It's black and white. Um, at the end of the day, you will have a reward." That's that's a tough place to live. And I guess in a very pragmatic way, I think if you have grown up with those attitudes, they're going to break sometime. I
Sure.
mean, there's going to come a point when it just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, and what you do with it, I think, is then maybe the more important, the choice of what happens at that point. Not if, but when and how you make your way through it. As we get to the fourth point here and dawning towards the end of our conversation, you say develop a wisdom practice. And I think we've sort of talked in and through this a little bit, but give me an idea of what a wisdom practice is.
We have talked around it because a wisdom practice to me, I mean, there are lots of ways to describe it, and maybe that's a whole next book. In fact, it's kind of now, where do we go from here? If we've
Right.
gotten survival, where do we go from there? And that's what wisdom practice. That's how I mean it. That's where do we go from here once we've worked out survival? But a wisdom practice to me is um, like I was describing just a minute ago, taking that answer to prayer as an input, as information, as opposed to a declaration, an order, taking it as information. It is saying, I'm gonna I'm gonna read the best literature of the world. I'm going to think about geology. I'm going to take what science is telling me about what doesn't happen or what doesn't work, and I'm going to take all of that and think about it. I'm going to understand that we don't have sure answers, that that life is complicated, that people have mixed motives, that the man across the table from me doesn't really know the answer either. And so our conversation is two people who are living in the midst of uncertainty and complexity, and we're just, we're working together to move along in this journey. That's that doesn't sound wonderful and enlightening, but that to me is a wisdom practice. That's wisdom is not having a sure answer. Wisdom is working the best we can with what we have.
Yeah. And so much harder than just tell me what to do and I'll do the thing. Yeah. The name of the book is Living on the Inside of the Edge. People can get it. There will be a link in the show notes where people can just click and purchase, make it nice and easy for you. It's a survival guide written by Christian Kimball, who's been my guest in this episode of the Cultural Hall. Christian, there are 3 questions that we ask everyone who steps into the Cultural Hall, and I will ask those of you right now. The first is do you have a calling right now? And if so, what is it?
I don't think I have an official calling right now. Um, I am, I consider myself in the current lingo a minister
Mm-hmm.
with one other man in our ward. But we joke with each other that we are the 2 people that the Elders Quorum president doesn't know what to do with, and so
You
he
two,
sends us
you
off.
two
He
go
sends us
hang
off
out.
into a
Go hang
corner
out.
and says, "You talk with each other," because um, I don't remember whether that's written down somewhere to make it an assignment. I do actually. I go back to the book and say, I think for people like me who live on the inside of the edge, most of us find our own way. Most of us find what other churches would call a vocation. We find what we feel is important to do,
Mm-hmm.
or that we are called to do, called in a vocational sense. In a this is my sense of what's important, as opposed to calling. I happen to be between. I hope it's between. I hope there's a next time between teaching gospel doctrine and I'm actually feel like I'm practicing up by working with the Dialogue Sunday programs that we put on since COVID, basically. But from time to time, I get called as a gospel doctrine teacher, and when I do, I'm teaching a class that has kind of open-ended discussion,
Sure.
and then from time to time, people will come along and say, "We can't have that. We have to have a by the book lesson," and then I get released, and I'm in the released mode at the moment.
Yeah, the ebb and flow of church instruction I have found to be curious over the years. I'll have, I had in one particular ward for a short time, a man who had studied Buddhism and had started to incorporate a lot of like the Buddhist practices within his Sunday school structure, and people really were sort of drawn to it. And then some people went, this is different, and then we stopped it. And then it was a very rudimentary, like into the books, and this is what we're doing. And then there was the time where that sort of was spent, and then it moved to another kind of open-ended, let's get into discussion. So the ebb and flow I find to be fascinating. I'm currently in the rigid structure of this is how we've done it, this is how we'll do it, we will forever do it, as far as my Sunday school, not teaching but observing and engaging. If you could
But
pick a
we're
calling.
actually
Oh, go ahead.
we actually move back and forth. We live in Utah now, um, and in our Utah ward, the current Sunday school president is more of the by the book
Mm-hmm.
kind of guy. I mean, he's a very thoughtful, good guy, but that's what he wants for Sunday school class. And
Mm-hmm.
and our current bishop is a delegator. He says, if that's what the Sunday school president wants, that's what we're doing.
Yep.
As opposed to some bishops who will micromanage and say, no, this is what I want.
Yeah.
But we spend a fair amount of time in Washington, D.C., where both of our sons and their families live. And so we're there because of them. But there is a ward in Washington, D.C. that we attend regularly when we're there. And there I'm asked to teach Sunday school, and we have much more the kind of lessons I would, the kind of discussions I would have. It's not like the church is all in one mode. It's
Sure.
it's hyper local in my experience.
Yeah. If you could pick a calling for yourself, either one that exists or make one up, what would you pick?
Actually, honestly, writing this book, I mean, I felt like that was a calling. That was my job. That's not my job for life, but writing this book and right now talking about it feels like the thing, I'll use religious language, the thing God wants me to do right now.
Sure. Well,
That's,
and the
and I
response
guess
to this book has been incredibly validating, as far as if you feel like people talking about it, the outreach to you, even just the straight purchasing of the book would certainly indicate that there is a resonance with this particular topic at this particular time, and that you were to be the one to kind of to do that. I'll put that on you. I'll put that all on you.
Yeah, and it is, even though I don't want to, make myself out to be a good guy. Actually, there are ways in which I'm unusually, not uniquely, but unusually situated to do this work right now, in terms of my life history and age and position in the church and all. So I think there's some argument in that way. I will relate, though, that sitting in an elders quorum meeting one day in my Utah ward, we had a discussion which I thought was wonderful, going around the room of, what do you have that you can provide for the community? Do you have a snowblower? Do you have, a roofing ladder? I mean, do you have some particular knowledge that's useful that you could deliver? And we got to me finally. I was very late in the circle, and I thought, I've been a tax lawyer all my life. I'm not going to talk about preparing tax returns. So what I offered up was that, and I think it's true, I seem to be able to talk with people who have left the church without it being an antagonizing, with it being an understanding, kind of mutual understanding kind of conversation, and instead of being antagonistic. And people turned around and said, hey, I haven't been able to talk with my brother in 5 years. Tell me more.
Yeah.
That turned out to be an appreciated, contribution, which I think that was a telling incident.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The final question that we ask everyone, we ask you to interpret it however you would like, but the question remains: what is your favorite part of your faith?
An experience. Let's see if I can do this without tearing up. An experience actually that happened in the Provo Temple back when I was not yet married, but was engaged to someone I never did marry, but was thinking about it. And I wanted an answer. I wanted should I do this or not? And the answer was, here's some things you should think about. Now you figure it out. That's been so important to me for now more than 40 years.
I love it. I appreciate that you'd be willing to share that with us. And the name of the book, like I've said, Living on the Inside of the Edge. There's a link to purchase that in the show notes. Is there an audio version of the book available?
Any day now.
Okay.
It's actually been submitted to Amazon Audible, but
Uh-huh. Forever.
they take up to a week or more, 10 days to validate or whatever they do with the audio files, but it's there, and I'm just waiting for them to release it. But it's in that mechanical system of whatever Audible does.
And is it you reading it, or did you have someone
No,
read it?
James Jones, who is one of the authors, one of the essays in the book, but uh, he's a black man in theology, in studying, and he's got a wonderful voice. I mean, he's actually a professional voice as well as now a doctrine. Yes. Anyway,
He
um,
so he reads it, and it should be
he reads it.
available.
Yes, and it'll be available any day now.
And interesting enough, James Jones, episode number 565 of the Cultural Hall, so people can go and hear a little bit about his story. He is the host of, or was at the time that he was on the Cultural Hall with us, the host of a podcast, Beyond the Block. He was a co-host of it, and people can hear his story. Just go to theculturalhall.com, or you can search in Google for episode 565. Christian, we hope that this episode has nourished and strengthened your body, that if you're not healthy enough to listen this week, that you'll be healthy enough to listen next week, and that when the time comes, you will be able to travel home in safety. In the meantime, we will be saving a seat for you on the back row of the Cultural Hall.